For 10 years, my father and I built Lawson and Company from the ground up. It was more than just a business, it was a legacy. I had poured my blood, sweat, and every waking hour into making it successful. We had dreams of expanding, of turning it into something that would outlive both of us. And then, in a single day, it was all gone. I remember the way he called me into his office, his face unreadable. I thought it was another strategy meeting. Instead, he told me, without a shred of remorse, that he had signed the company over to someone else. Not just anyone, his mistress, Vanessa. I need you to understand, he said, as if his words would soften the blow. Vanessa has a vision for this company. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When it didn't come, I laughed. A bitter, humorless sound. You mean our company? I said, my hands clenching into fists. The one we spent a decade building together? His expression didn't change. It's done, son. You can either work under Vanessa or walk away. The betrayal burned through me like acid. Work under her? The woman who had been lurking in the shadows for years, pretending to be a passing fancy while sinking her claws deeper into everything that was supposed to be mine? I had tolerated their affair, had even bitten my tongue when my mother left him over it, but this? This was beyond anything I could accept. I stood there for a long time, staring at the man I once admired. He didn't even flinch under my glare. He had already made peace with his decision. That was when I knew I wouldn't forgive. I wouldn't forget. And I sure as hell wouldn't let him get away with it. I walked out of my father's office without another word. My hands trembled with fury, but I forced myself to stay calm. Anger wouldn't serve me now, I needed strategy. As I stepped outside, the employees I had worked alongside for years greeted me like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. They just didn't know it yet. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. Of course, she wouldn't be, she was too smart for that. She knew exactly what she had done, and she wouldn't dare face me yet. I didn't go back to my office. Instead, I got in my car and drove. I needed space, distance. I needed to think. I ended up at the old cafe where my best friend, Daniel, worked. He took one look at me and slid a whiskey across the counter. Bad day, he asked. My father just handed over our company to his mistress, I said, watching the liquid swirl in the glass. Daniel let out a low whistle. That's beyond bad. That's movie villain level bad. I took a sip, letting the burn steady me. I'm going to take it back. Daniel raised an eyebrow. And how exactly do you plan to do that? I set my glass down, my mind already working through the possibilities. I don't know yet. But Vanessa thinks she's won. That's her mistake. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There were people who still owed me favors. People who wouldn't hesitate to give me what I needed. Vanessa might be sitting in my chair now, but she wouldn't be there for long. She just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I woke up with one goal, to dismantle everything Vanessa had stolen. If my father had chosen her over me, then I had no father. If he thought I'd bow my head and accept my fate, he didn't know me at all. I started by reaching out to the people who mattered, longtime employees, trusted partners, and key investors. Many of them were just as blindsided as I was. Some were hesitant to get involved, afraid of angering my father, but others? Others were furious. She has no idea how to run a company, one of the senior managers, Greg, grumbled over coffee. Half of the employees are already nervous about the change. They don't trust her. That was exactly what I needed to hear. I spent the next few days meeting quietly with department heads, listening to their concerns, their frustrations. I didn't ask them to take sides yet. I just let them know that if things went south under Vanessa's leadership, I would be there to pick up the pieces. And then there was the legal side of things. Daniel put me in touch with a corporate attorney, a sharp-minded woman named Eva. When I told her what happened, she leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the desk. Your father signing over the company isn't the end, she said. If we dig, we might find something. A loophole. A mistake. I nodded. Find it. Because if Vanessa thought I was going to fight her head-on, she was wrong. I wasn't going to challenge her in the boardroom. I was going to destroy her from the inside out. I spent the next week working in the shadows, pulling at every loose thread I could find. And, as expected, Vanessa's foundation was weaker than it appeared. The first crack? The employees. Vanessa might have had my father's favor, but she didn't have the loyalty of the people who actually made the company run. She had no history with them, no trust. Her presence was tolerated, but not respected. That kind of thing mattered more than she realized. I made sure to stay in contact with my former colleagues, carefully sowing the seeds of doubt. I didn't need to outright ask them to turn against Vanessa, I just had to wait for her to make the inevitable mistakes. And she did. Reports started piling up about her incompetence, delayed decisions, bad deals, missed opportunities. She was trying to assert authority, but she lacked the experience to back it up. When she forced out one of our most senior project managers for not being a team player, I knew she had made her first real blunder. I met Greg later that night at a small bar downtown. He slid a folder across the table. "These are emails between Vanessa and some of the investors," he muttered, taking a sip of his drink. "She's promising things she can't deliver. The board is already getting restless." I flipped through the documents, my pulse steady. This was exactly what I had been waiting for. "The moment she starts losing the board's confidence," I said, "she's done." Greg smirked. "And how do you plan on making that happen?" I glanced at my phone, where Eva had sent me a new message, "We need to meet." I found something interesting. I looked back at Greg. "I have a feeling I won't have to do much." The second crack? The legal side of things. Eva had dug deep into the company's paperwork, looking for any weaknesses in my father's transfer of ownership. And what she found was better than I could have hoped for. "You're still legally tied to the company," she told me when we met at her office the next day. "Your father transferred majority ownership to Vanessa, but he didn't fully dissolve your position. You still hold an executive stake." I leaned forward. Which means, she said with a smile, "you still have rights. You can access financial records, attend board meetings, and most importantly, challenge her leadership." That was the opening I needed. Vanessa had taken my company, but she hadn't completely erased me. That meant I still had a seat at the table. And I was about to use it. The final crack? My father himself. I knew my father well enough to know that Vanessa's reign wouldn't last if she started damaging the company's reputation. He had spent too many years building it up, too much effort making it successful. If she started driving it into the ground, he wouldn't stand by and watch. So, I set the final stage of my plan into motion. First, I leaked Vanessa's poor leadership to the right people: journalists, business analysts, and industry insiders. Nothing major, just whispers of instability, enough to make investors wary. Then, I reached out to key board members, subtly reminding them of my experience, my years of dedication to the company. They were hesitant at first, but as Vanessa's mistakes piled up, they started listening. Finally, I made sure my father heard the news from the people he trusted most. It took less than a month for the board to schedule an emergency meeting. Vanessa had walked into that company thinking she had one. She thought she could steal what I had built and walk away unchallenged. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Friday morning, and by the time I walked into the Lawson and Company conference room, I could already see the storm brewing. Vanessa sat at the head of the table, trying to maintain an air of control, but there was tension in her posture. She was dressed sharply, as always, but the tight grip on her pen betrayed her nerves. My father was there too, sitting beside her, though his expression was unreadable. I took a seat near the middle of the table, deliberately choosing a position that suggested I was in but not leading, not yet. Let them think I was just here to listen. Let them underestimate me. The meeting started with routine updates, but it didn't take long for the discussion to shift. "I think we need to address the concerns about recent performance," one of the senior board members, Mr. Ellis, finally said, his gaze shifting to Vanessa. Several key investors are worried about the direction we're heading in. Vanessa straightened in her chair. Every leadership transition comes with an adjustment period, she said smoothly. I'm confident that once my strategies are fully implemented, we'll see the results we're aiming for. Your strategies? Mr. Ellis pressed. Because from what I understand, many of those strategies have already resulted in declining investor confidence. I glanced around the room. I wasn't the only one who had spent the last month quietly working the board members. Vanessa thought she had control, but in reality, she was balancing on a knife's edge. Look, Vanessa said, keeping her voice even, if we overreact every time the company experiences growing pains, we'll never move forward. I understand that my leadership style is different from what you're used to, but progress requires change. Perfect. She had just framed herself as an outsider. I leaned forward slightly, just enough to draw attention. Change isn't the problem, I said. Bad leadership is. A hush fell over the room. Vanessa's eyes snapped to mine. Excuse me? I turned to the board, keeping my tone measured but firm. I've spoken to department heads. I've spoken to employees. Morale is lower than it's been in years. Key projects have stalled. Long-term clients are questioning their contracts. I let that settle for a beat. Vanessa's leadership isn't pushing us forward, it's driving us toward collapse. My father exhaled sharply. That's enough. I turned to him. Is it? Have you looked at the quarterly projections? The ones Vanessa conveniently didn't include in this meeting? I pulled a folder from my briefcase and slid it across the table. These show a 5% decline in profits in just one quarter. You really want to wait another 6 months to see how bad it gets? Silence. Vanessa's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly. This is nothing more than an attempt to undermine me, she said, forcing a laugh. It's a personal attack. I smiled. It's business. Another board member cleared her throat. Actually, I'd like to discuss this further. If there are concerns about leadership competency, we have a responsibility to address them. Vanessa's composure cracked. I was given this company, she snapped. That's the problem, I said. You were given it. I built it. That was the final blow. The board members exchanged glances, and I could see the decision forming in their minds. My father rubbed his temple, as if only now realizing what a mistake he had made. And then, Mr. Ellis spoke. I moved to hold a leadership vote. Vanessa inhaled sharply. You can't. We can, another board member interrupted. And we will. Vanessa turned to my father, desperate. Tell them this is ridiculous. But my father didn't say a word. That's when she knew she had lost. The boardroom felt heavy with tension. Vanessa's expression shifted from confidence to desperation as the reality of the situation settled in. She turned to my father one last time, her voice sharp and pleading. You gave me this company, she hissed. Are you just going to let them take it from me? My father didn't meet her gaze. His fingers tapped idly against the polished wood of the table, his mind clearly racing. For the first time since this mess started, I saw something in his face I hadn't expected: regret. He had underestimated me. He had thought I would sulk and disappear. Now, he was realizing just how wrong he had been. Let's not be hasty, he said finally, his voice controlled but uncertain. Vanessa has had a rough start, yes, but... No, Robert. Mr. Ellis cut him off, his tone firm. This is about business, not personal favors. We need a vote. Now. Vanessa's jaw tightened. I could see the wheels turning in her head, scrambling for a way out. She had none. The vote was swift. Vanessa fought until the last second, throwing out arguments about how unfair it was, how she just needed more time, but it didn't matter. The numbers spoke for themselves, and the board had lost confidence in her. When the final tally came in, the decision was clear: Vanessa was out. I expected her to leave with dignity. I should have known better. As the board meeting adjourned, she shot up from her seat, her eyes blazing with fury. "This isn't over," she spat at me. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've done." I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I felt the satisfaction settle deep in my bones. "I know exactly what I've done," I replied. "I've fixed a mistake." Her lips curled in disgust as she turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Just like that, Vanessa was gone. After the meeting, my father lingered, his face lined with something I couldn't quite place. "Guilt, maybe." "You planned this," he said quietly. "I did," I admitted. "And I'll do whatever it takes to protect this company from people who don't deserve it." A long silence stretched between us. Then, with a slow nod, my father sighed. "I suppose I underestimated you." "No," I said. "You forgot who I was." He didn't argue. That evening, I sat in my office overlooking the city skyline. The weight of what I had done settled over me, but there was no regret. Vanessa had thought she could waltz in and take what I built. My father had thought I would accept it. They were both wrong. I had won. But I wasn't done yet. Vanessa had taken something from me, and I had taken it back. Now, it was time to make sure she never got close to anything of mine ever again. The morning after Vanessa's downfall, the office was buzzing. Word traveled fast, and by the time I arrived, employees were whispering in the hallways, exchanging knowing looks. Some even greeted me with nods of approval. I hadn't realized just how much people resented Vanessa's presence until she was gone. Greg met me outside my office, a smirk tugging at his lips. "You made quite the impression yesterday," he said. I shrugged. "It was necessary." "Necessary?" "Maybe," he said. "Satisfying?" "Definitely." He wasn't wrong. I spent the day repairing the damage Vanessa had caused, meeting with department heads, reassuring nervous clients, and setting things back on track. It would take time to undo everything, but I knew one thing for certain: the company was finally in the right hands. But Vanessa was still a loose end. And if I knew her, she wouldn't go down without trying to take something down with her. I wasn't about to let that happen. I should have known Vanessa wouldn't disappear quietly. 3 days after she was voted out, a storm started brewing. At first, it was small rumors swirling through industry circles, subtle jabs in anonymous business columns hinting at instability in Lawson and Company. But I knew who was behind it. Then, the real blow came. I was sitting in my office when Greg burst in, his face pale. "You need to see this," he said, dropping a folder onto my desk. I flipped it open. Inside were copies of leaked company documents, confidential reports, internal projections. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to shake investor confidence if spun the right way. "She's leaking information," I muttered. Greg nodded. "And that's not all. A few key investors are pulling back, too much uncertainty. Some of them are listening to her. Vanessa was trying to sabotage us from the outside." I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't unexpected. I had already prepared for the possibility that she'd lash out. What she didn't realize was that I had been 2 steps ahead the whole time. I pulled out my phone and dialed Eva. "It's happening," I said when she picked up. Her voice was steady. "I figured. Good thing we prepared for this." She wasn't wrong. Vanessa thought she could attack the company's reputation, but she didn't know what I had on her. I glanced at the locked drawer in my desk, the one that held the file I had been saving for the right moment. Evidence of financial misconduct, shady dealings Vanessa had been involved in long before she set foot in Lawson and Company. She thought she could play dirty. She was about to find out just how ruthless I could be. I didn't retaliate immediately. That would have been too easy. Instead, I let Vanessa believe she was winning. I let the rumors spread, let the investors whisper. She wanted me to panic, to make a desperate move that would expose a weakness. I did the opposite. I spent the next few days reinforcing the company from the inside. I held meetings with every major investor, ensuring them that Lawson & Company was stronger than ever. I personally reassured clients, showing them the numbers that Vanessa hadn't seen, the ones proving we were already bouncing back. And all the while, I was preparing my final move. Eva had been busy. She dug deeper into Vanessa's history, pulling records from her previous business ventures. What she found was worse than I expected: misuse of funds, undeclared earnings, even ties to fraudulent investments. She's been playing this game for a long time, Eva told me. But she got sloppy. That was all I needed to hear. The final piece fell into place when I got a call from a journalist at a well-known financial publication. "I've been hearing some interesting things about Vanessa," he said cautiously. "Care to comment?" I smiled. "Let's meet. I have something you'll want to see." Vanessa wanted a war. I was about to end it. The moment Vanessa's name hit the headlines, it was over. The article dropped on Monday morning, a scathing exposé that laid everything bare: her financial misdeeds, her history of manipulating investors, the questionable deals she had swept under the rug. Every skeleton she had hidden away was now on full display for the world to see. I read the article with a quiet sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. By noon, Vanessa's phone must have been ringing off the hook. Reporters were hounding her for a statement. Former business partners were cutting ties. The whispers that she had started to undermine Lawson & Company? They had turned against her now. But the best part? The legal consequences were about to hit her, too. Eva had already filed an official report with the financial authorities, detailing Vanessa's history of fraudulent activity. She wouldn't just lose credibility, she was facing a full-scale investigation. I knew the exact moment it hit her. Because at exactly 3:17 p.m., she stormed into my office. "You did this," she hissed, slamming the newspaper onto my desk. I leaned back in my chair, meeting her furious gaze with an unreadable expression. "Did I?" She was shaking, her face red with anger. "Don't play innocent with me, you son of a..." She cut herself off, exhaling sharply, trying to regain control. I waited, letting the silence stretch. "You wanted to ruin me," she finally said, her voice lower but no less venomous. "You wanted me gone." I folded my hands in front of me. "No, Vanessa. You did this to yourself." I gestured at the article. "You thought you could take something that wasn't yours and walk away unscathed. But actions have consequences." Her eyes flashed with desperation now. "Robert will fix this," she said, voice trembling. "He won't let this happen." Ah. There it was. The last vestige of hope she had. I stood, walking around my desk until I was standing right in front of her. "You really think my father is going to risk his own reputation to save you?" I shook my head. "He's already distancing himself. By the end of the week, he won't even admit he knew you." She wavered. And I knew I had one. For the first time, Vanessa looked afraid. Not just angry or frustrated, afraid. She knew there was no coming back from this. "I suggest you leave, Vanessa," I said quietly. "While you still can." Her breathing was uneven. Her fingers clenched into fists. But she didn't have a single move left to play. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked out of my office. I watched her go, knowing it was the last time she would ever set foot in Lawson & Company. She had tried to take my legacy. I had erased her from it entirely. And just like that, the war was over. The end.